Your reference letter, Duke Cassian Morkan said, placing the folded paper on the desk between them with the precision of a man laying down a weapon, was forged. Clara's blood went cold, but she kept her spine straight, kept her hands steady in her lap even as her entire future, her position, her pension claim, her last shred of respectability, balanced on a knife's edge in this lamplit study. His gaze pinned her like a butterfly to velvet, dark and unreadable and wrong in a way that made her pulse spike with an awareness she had no business feeling. And when he leaned forward, the air itself seemed to thicken with something dangerous and electric. "I don't understand," she said, and hated how her voice wavered. "Don't you?" He unfolded the letter with deliberate slowness. "Mrs. Aldridge of Bath, glowing praise for your discretion, as your competence with correspondence, your ability to manage delicate household matters. She writes that you served her mother for 3 years. He looked up. "Mrs. Aldridge has been dead for 18 months. Her mother died childless in 1873. The floor seemed to tilt. Clara had received that reference 6 weeks ago. An unmarked envelope slipped under her lodging house door with a brief note claiming it had been arranged by Thomas's former regiment as a final kindness to an officer's widow. She'd been so desperate, so grateful, she hadn't questioned why a commanding officer would go to such trouble for a man 2 years dead. She'd been played. "I didn't forge it," Clara said carefully. "The letter arrived anonymously, I assumed. I was told it came through military connections. And yet you used it to secure employment in my mother's household." Cassian Morkan rose from behind the desk, and Clara's throat tightened. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than fashion dictated, and he moved with a fluidity that made her think of hunting things. The study felt smaller with him standing. "That makes you either a liar or a pawn, Miss Whitby. I need to know which." Clara's mind raced. She'd been at Morkan House for less than 4 hours, barely long enough to be shown to a room in the north wing and meet the Dowager Duchess Honoria, who had smiled with her mouth and watched Clara with eyes like a magistrate. The household ran on rules that felt excessive even for a great estate. Locked wings, servants who moved like ghosts and spoke in half sentences, an attention in the air that made Clara's skin prickle. And now this, a forged reference. Someone had wanted her here badly enough to manufacture credentials and slip them anonymously into her desperate hands. She met his gaze and refused to flinch. "If you wanted me frightened, Your Grace, you wouldn't have bothered with propriety. You would have had me thrown out the moment you discovered the forgery." She paused. Let that sink in. "So I'm not here by accident. Someone wanted me in this house. The question is whether you know who." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Approval, maybe, or interest. "Clever," he said softly. "Observant," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." He circled the desk, came to stand 3 feet from her chair, close enough that she could smell him, sandalwood and night air and something wild beneath it that made her skin prickle with fresh awareness. "My mother hired you," he said, "against my explicit instructions. She claims you came highly recommended through a Bath connection, but clearly that recommendation was manufactured. So either she orchestrated this herself, or someone convinced her you were exactly what this household needed." He tilted his head. "I'm told you're skilled with letters and household accounts, that you notice details others miss. Is that true, or more fiction?" Clara's heart hammered, but she forced herself to think past the fear. This wasn't an interrogation. This was an audition. "It's true," she said. "Prove it." He gestured to the desk, where a stack of correspondence sat beside a leather-bound ledger. Clara hesitated, then rose and crossed to the desk, acutely aware of him watching her every movement. She opened the ledger first, household expenses, listed in a clerk's precise hand. Then the letters, replies to invitations, notes from tenants, a bill from a London tailor. She read quickly, her mind cataloging patterns the way it always did. Dates, signatures, phrasing, and there, a discrepancy so small she almost missed it. "Your steward," Clara said slowly, tapping a letter dated 5 days prior, "wrote to a Mr. Percival Greaves in London about timber shipments, but the ledger shows no corresponding expense entry for timber, and the phrasing here, Usual arrangement as discussed. Suggests regular communication. She looked up. But when I cross-referenced the date against your social calendar, you were in London yourself that week, up at the same gentleman's club where Mr. Greaves holds membership. Cassian went very still. Clara's pulse quickened. Your steward arranged a business correspondence the same week you were in the city, with a man you could have met directly. Either your steward is conducting business you don't know about, or... She pulled another letter from the stack, her breath catching as the pattern sharpened. Or he's making certain you and Mr. Greaves never meet. Look, 3 invitations to that club, all declined on your behalf in the steward's hand. And here, a note from Greaves himself asking after your mother's health, unopened and filed away. She met Cassian's gaze. Someone is controlling your correspondence, Your Grace, limiting who can reach you and what information flows in and out of this estate. Your steward isn't just managing your household, he's isolating it. The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. How long, Cassian said quietly, did it take you to see that? 40 seconds for the pattern, another 30 to connect it. And if I asked you to audit the entire household correspondence, quietly, without alerting staff, could you identify who else might be part of this? There it was, the real reason she was here. Clara's mind spun. Her fiancé had been an officer. She'd managed his regimental paperwork for 2 years before his death, had learned to read between lines and spot the patterns that could mean the difference between a soldier's pay and destitution. She knew how men in power hid things. She knew how to find them. But this was dangerous. A duke didn't forge references and trap a penniless companion in his household unless the stakes were catastrophic. I could, Clara said, but I won't. Not until you tell me what I'm really looking for. Cassian smiled then, sharp and humorless. You want honesty. In this house, Miss Whitby, honesty is a luxury most can't afford. Then we're at an impasse. Are we? He moved closer, close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. His eyes were dark gray, almost black in the lamplight, and she felt the air change again, that electric charge that made her pulse skip and her breath catch. You need this position. Your pension claim is being contested by Thomas Whitby's family, and without employment, you'll be evicted from your lodgings within the month. You have no relatives, no dowry, no prospects. His voice dropped. I know everything about you, Clara Whitby. The question is what you're willing to do with what you know about me. Her name in his mouth felt like a brand. You haven't told me anything, Clara said, but her voice came out breathless. No, Cassian agreed. But you've already guessed this house has secrets. You've seen the locked east wing, the way the staff watch you. He leaned closer, and Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. You're clever enough to know that walking away now would be a mistake. Because if you leave, Miss Whitby, you'll spend the rest of your short, desperate life wondering what you missed, and in wondering who wanted you here badly enough to forge a reference and deliver it to your door in the dead of night. It was a threat and a promise, and something darker she didn't have a name for. Clara's hands trembled, so she clasped them behind her back. What do you want from me? An alliance, Cassian straightened, putting distance between them again, and Clara could breathe. You audit the household correspondence, quietly. You tell no one, not the servants, not my mother, not anyone outside this room. You report only to me. In exchange, I guarantee your wages, your position, and your safety for as long as you're under this roof. And my pension claim? His smile was cold. I have lawyers, Miss Whitby, very good ones. If you do this work well, I'll ensure Thomas Whitby's family never troubles you again. It should have been an easy answer. Food, shelter, wages, and the pension that would let her rebuild some fragment of a life, all for reading letters and spotting lies, things she already knew how to do. But Clara had learned the hard way that men who offered safety always demanded a price. No, she said. Cassian's brows rose. No? Not without conditions. Clara lifted her chin, forced steel into her voice. I want a written contract. Wages guaranteed for 6 months minimum, regardless of what I find. My personal correspondence may not be intercepted or read without my knowledge. I'll know if you try, Your Grace, so don't insult me by lying. And if I'm to be placed in any situation that could compromise my reputation, I'm to be informed beforehand and given the choice to decline. You're negotiating. I'm protecting myself. You said this house has secrets. I won't be the woman who drowns in them because she was too desperate to ask questions. For a long moment, Cassian simply looked at her, really looked, as if seeing past the morning dress and the too pale face to something underneath. Then he nodded slowly. You'll have your contract, he said, drawn up by morning and signed before witnesses. But understand this, Miss Whitby. Once you agree, you're bound to this house and everything in it. There will be things you see, things you learn, that you'll wish you could unknow. And there will be no walking away in the middle. No running when it gets dangerous. His voice went soft, almost gentle, because it will get dangerous. As I can promise you that. Clara thought of her empty lodgings, the overdue rent, the letters from Thomas's mother full of venom and legal threats. She thought of the forged reference that had appeared like a lifeline from the dark. She thought of the way the Dowager had smiled when Clara arrived, as if she'd been expected, as if she'd been chosen. I'll need a desk, Clara said, and access to the household records going back at least a year. If there's a pattern, I'll find it. Cassian's smile was slow and dangerous, and sent heat curling low in Clara's stomach. Unwanted and undeniable. Welcome to Morcant House, Miss Whitby, he said. The rules will be explained at breakfast. I suggest you follow them. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a lock sliding home. Clara's assigned room was in the north wing, smaller than she'd expected for a companion's quarters, but well appointed. A fire burned in the grate. The bed was already turned down. And on the writing desk sat a leather folder she hadn't noticed before. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a detailed map of Morcant House, with certain corridors marked in red ink. The east wing, a servant's staircase, the garden gate near the moors, and a single sheet of paper unsigned, in a woman's elegant script. The east wing is forbidden after sunset. On quiet nights, you will be informed by 9 o'clock. Remain in your room until dawn, no matter what you hear. Do not accept invitations from staff to walk the grounds after dark. Do not ask questions about the Duke's health or his late father's death. You were brought here for a purpose. And Miss Whitby, serve it well. Clara's skin went cold. Someone, the Dowager perhaps, or another player she hadn't yet met, had left this for her, had known she would need instructions, had planned for her arrival down to the specific room, the specific warnings. She crossed to the window and looked out at the dark moorlands beyond the estate walls. Fog rolled across the grass like something living, and in the distance, near the tree line, she saw movement, a shape too large to be a dog, too fluid to be human. Silver-black fur, eyes that caught the lamplight from the house and burned gold. Clara's breath fogged the glass. The shape watched the house for another moment, then melted into the trees. When she finally slept, her dreams were full of teeth. Morning came with a knock at 6 o'clock sharp. Is a maid with a ewer of hot water and instructions to dress for breakfast, with the Dowager at 7. Clara chose her most respectable morning dress, pinned her hair with ruthless precision, and descended the grand staircase with her pulse hammering in her throat. The breakfast room was smaller than she'd expected, clearly meant for family rather than formal entertaining. The Dowager Duchess Honoria sat at the head of the table, a vision in black silk and lace gloves, her silver hair arranged in a style 20 years out of fashion but no less commanding for it. Miss Whitby, she said, her voice warm and edged like a blade. I trust you slept well. It was not a question. Yes, Your Grace, Clara lied, taking the seat indicated by a hovering footman. And you found the household instructions clear. So it had been the Dowager who left the folder. Clara's stomach tightened. Very clear, Your Grace. Good. Honoria poured tea with the precision of a woman who had spent 60 years perfecting the art of control. Then let us speak plainly, my dear. You were not hired by chance. Your late fiancé, Lieutenant Thomas Whitby, served under Colonel Marlowe, did he not? Clara's breath caught. Yes. Colonel Marlowe is a friend to this house. When he learned of your difficulties with the Whitby family, he reached out to me. I arranged for the reference letter. I ensured it found its way to you. The Dowager's eyes were sharp as glass. I needed a companion with specific skills, discretion, intelligence, and the ability to read what men try to hide in their correspondence. You, like Miss Whitby, fit those requirements precisely. The floor seemed to tilt. You manufactured my employment. I created an opportunity. Honoria sipped her tea. One you were free to refuse. That you accepted, that you are sitting here now, tells me you understand how little power you have in this world, and how much you wish to change that. It was brutal and true, and Clara hated her for saying it. Why me? Clara asked. There are dozens of educated women who need work. Why go to such trouble? Because you loved an officer who died investigating something he shouldn't have. Honoria set down her cup. Because you know how to keep secrets, even when keeping them costs you everything. And because, Miss Whitby, you have nothing left to lose, which makes you far more dangerous than you appear. The words hung in the air like smoke. And my son has enemies, Honoria continued. Powerful men who would see this estate broken and our family destroyed. They work through scandal, through whispers, through careful corruption of the very people who should be loyal. We believe one of them has placed a spy in this household, someone feeding information to London, someone working to make certain my son's movements, his correspondence, his very life, are known to those who wish him harm. Clara's mind raced back to the steward's letters, Mr. Percival Greaves, the isolated correspondence, the declined invitations. You think it's the steward, she said. I think it's someone. Honoria's gaze was steady. And I think you're clever enough to find out who, and cautious enough not to get yourself killed doing it. And the rules. Clara gestured vaguely toward her room, toward the folder. The locked wing, the quiet nights, the warnings, are for your protection. Honoria's voice went soft, almost kind. This house has peculiarities, Miss Whitby. My son suffers from a hereditary condition that requires absolute privacy at certain times. The staff are loyal and discreet, but you are new. You don't yet understand what you're part of. So you will follow the rules without question, and in return, you will be kept safe. It wasn't an answer. It was a prettier version of Cassian's threat. And if I find your spy, Clara asked, what then? Then you will have earned everything my son promised you, and a great deal more besides. Honoria smiled. But first, you must survive the work. Now finish your tea, my dear. Cassian requires your presence in the library at 8 o'clock to review this week's correspondence. You'll be working closely with him for the foreseeable future. Propriety demands I remind you that a young woman alone with a gentleman, even in a professional capacity, must maintain appropriate boundaries. The words were correct, but the Dowager's eyes gleamed with something that looked like satisfaction. She was throwing them together deliberately. Clara's pulse kicked. Of course, Your Grace. Excellent. Oh, and Miss Whitby, on quiet nights, when you're instructed to remain in your room, you'll hear things. Sounds from the moors, from the east wing, perhaps from the corridors themselves. You will stay in your room. You will not investigate. You will not open your door for any reason. Honoria's smile never wavered. Not even if you hear someone calling your name. The library was a cathedral of leather and old paper, 2 stories tall with a gallery running the perimeter and windows that overlooked the moorlands. Cassian stood at one of those windows, his back to the door, his posture rigid. You're early, he said without turning. I prefer not to be kept waiting, Clara replied, setting her reticule on the desk. And your mother was quite explicit about the time. My mother is explicit about everything. He turned, and Clara's breath caught despite herself. In daylight, he was no less dangerous, if anything. The sun through the windows made him look carved from stone, all hard lines and controlled power, and that predatory grace that made her pulse spike. She also, I assume, told you that she arranged your reference, that you were selected. I not randomly hired. She did. And you're not running. Clara lifted her chin. I signed a contract, Your Grace. I keep my agreements. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or something darker. The correspondence is there. He gestured to a stack of letters on the long library table. Start with anything addressed to or from London in the last month. I want to know every person my steward has been writing to, and whether any of them connect to Lord Percival Knox. The name landed like a stone in still water. "Who is Lord Percival Knox?" Clara asked. "A gentleman of excellent reputation and vicious intent. He leads a moral reform society of sorts. They concern themselves with rooting out what they consider deviance and madness in powerful families." Cassian's voice was carved ice. "Art Knox has been circling this estate for 6 months. I believe he's the one receiving information from inside these walls. If I'm right, he's building a case to have me declared unfit and this estate seized." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that my late father suffered from episodes of violent madness, and that the condition runs in the bloodline." He met her gaze steadily. "Knox will claim I'm dangerous, that I should be confined for the safety of others. And if he can manufacture enough evidence, enough witnesses, enough scandal, enough carefully documented incidents, he can make it stick." Clara's throat tightened. "Is it true? The madness? Does it matter?" Cassian moved closer, and the library suddenly felt smaller. "You're here to find the leak, Miss Whitby. Not to diagnose my mental fitness. It matters if I'm going to be locked in a house with a man who might be dangerous." He smiled, and it was not kind. "Then let me be clear. I am dangerous, just not in the way Knox claims. Now, are you going to do the work you were hired for, or do I need to find someone with a stronger stomach?" It was a challenge and a dismissal, and Clara refused both. She crossed to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat. "I'll need ink and paper for notes, and if you want this done properly, you'll stop hovering and let me work." For a moment, Cassian simply stared at her. Then he laughed, a short surprise sound, and pulled out the chair across from her. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Whitby." "I'm very desperate," Clara corrected, reaching for the first letter, "which makes me far more useful than either." And as she bent over the correspondence, she felt his gaze on her like heat, like a weight, like the first edge of something she had no name for, but couldn't seem to resist. Outside, on the moors, the fog rolled in early, and somewhere in the east wing, something howled. By the third morning, Clara had established a routine that felt like armor. Wake at 6, dress with military precision, breakfast with the Dowager's cutting observations, then escape to the library where the correspondence waited like a puzzle she was finally learning to solve. She'd found 5 more letters now, all from the steward, Silas Merritt, to London addresses, all coded in the language of ordinary business, timber shipments, fabric orders, tenant matters. But when Clara cross-referenced the dates against Cassian's schedule, the pattern sharpened into something damning. Every letter coincided with a social event, a trip to town, a meeting with solicitors. Merritt wasn't just managing correspondence. He was tracking the Duke's movements and reporting them to someone. The question was who? Clara added the newest letter to her chart, this one mentioning a delivery delayed by weather, when the household log showed clear skies, and felt that familiar spark of satisfaction when pieces aligned. "You're doing it again." She looked up to find Cassian in the doorway, already dressed for the day in charcoal wool that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. Her stomach flipped despite herself. "Doing what?" Clara asked. "That small smile. The one you get when you've caught someone in a lie." He crossed to the table with that fluid grace that made her pulse skip. "What have you found?" Clara turned the chart toward him. 5 more letters, all to London, all timed to track your movements. And this latest one, she tapped the paper, mentions weather that never happened. It's either a code or a signal. Cassian studied the chart, his expression darkening. Merritt's been with this family for 15 years, which makes him either deeply compromised or very well paid to betray you. Clara met his gaze. The question is whether he's acting alone or part of a network. A network implies coordination, planning. Cassian's voice went cold, which means whoever's behind this has been watching this house for months, possibly years. Before Clara could respond, the Dowager appeared in the doorway, already dressed for afternoon calls in black silk that rustled like warning. "Cassian, the Harrisons are arriving at 2 o'clock for the tenant dispute meeting. You'll need Miss Whitby to take notes. Propriety demands a woman present when discussing Mrs. Harrison's complaints about boundaries." Her gaze shifted to Clara. "You'll want to change into something suitable for receiving guests, my dear. The blue day dress, I think. It's more appropriate than perpetual mourning. It wasn't a suggestion. Clara's throat tightened. She'd been at Morkan House 3 days, and already the Dowager was dictating her wardrobe, her schedule, her every movement. But refusing would raise questions she couldn't afford to answer. Of course, Your Grace. Excellent. The meeting will be in the small parlor. Cassian will escort you down. Honoria's smile was steel-wrapped in lace. Do try to look competent, Miss Whitby. First impressions matter in the country. The tenant meeting was excruciating. Mrs. Harrison was a formidable woman with opinions about property lines and grievances about her neighbor's sheep, and she delivered both with the force of artillery fire. Clara took notes with mechanical precision, while Cassian mediated with the patience of a man accustomed to managing small wars. But what made Clara's pulse race wasn't the dispute, it was the proximity. The small parlor lived up to its name. Cassian sat close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something wilder beneath it. Every time he leaned forward to examine a document, his sleeve brushed her arm. When he reached past her for the estate map, his breath stirred the hair at her temple, and through it all, Clara felt that electric awareness she had no business feeling. The way the room seemed smaller with him in it, the way her skin prickled when he was near, the way her heart hammered against her stays like it was trying to escape. By the time the Harrisons finally left, Clara's nerves were strung tight as wire. You did well, Cassian said as the parlor door closed behind them. Mrs. Harrison respects precision. She'll remember you favorably. I'm not here to be remembered favorably. I'm here to find your leak. You're here to survive in a society that will judge you on far more than your competence. Cassian's voice softened. The Dowager is right. First impressions matter. And if the local families believe you're just a companion taking notes, they'll speak more freely in your presence. Clara hadn't thought of that. You want me to spy during social calls. I want you to listen. There's a difference. He paused, then added quietly. And I want you to have allies here. Women who will defend your reputation if Knox tries to attack it. The words landed like a promise and a warning both. Before Clara could respond, a footman appeared with a message. The Dowager required Clara's presence at dinner tonight, along with 3 neighboring families. Full formal dress. Cassian's expression went carefully blank. Mother is forcing proximity. What? Dinners, social obligations, situations where propriety demands I escort you, sit near you, engage you in conversation. His gaze held hers. She's creating a pattern that will either strengthen your position here or destroy it. Depending on how people interpret our connection. Clara's breath caught. We don't have a connection, don't we? The question hung between them, dangerous and impossible to answer. Then Cassian stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. Wear the blue dress. And Clara, don't let the other women intimidate you. You're sharper than all of them combined. He left before she could tell him that it wasn't the other women she was worried about. Dinner was an elegant nightmare. 3 families, 12 people total, all watching Clara with the predatory interest of society matrons evaluating fresh meat. The Dowager held court at the head of the table, while Cassian played the perfect host, charming, controlled, utterly untouchable, except when he looked at Clara. Those moments, brief, charged, quickly shuttered, made her skin flush and her pulse race in ways she absolutely could not afford. Miss Whitby, Mrs. Thornton said from across the table, her smile sharp as glass. The Dowager tells us you're recently come from Bath. How are you finding our little corner of the moors? Very beautiful, Clara said carefully. And the household has been exceptionally welcoming. I'm sure it has. Mrs. Thornton's gaze slid to Cassian, then back. Though I imagine it must be quite isolated after city life. Don't you find yourself lonely? It was a trap disguised as concern. Not at all, Clara replied. I'm kept quite busy with correspondence and household matters. The Dowager is an excellent employer. And the Duke? This from Miss Pemberton, younger and more direct. I understand you work closely with His Grace on estate business. That must be, stimulating. The emphasis on stimulating made Clara's stomach turn. Cassian's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Clara saw the tension in his shoulders. They were being tested, evaluated. These women were deciding whether Clara was a threat or a curiosity. and their verdict would determine whether her reputation survived the season. His Grace has been most professional, Clara said, meeting Miss Pemberton's gaze steadily. As have I. The work is quite straightforward. Letters, ledgers, tenant records. Nothing that would scandalize even the most proper drawing room. Mrs. Thornton laughed. A sound like breaking glass. My dear, in the country, everything scandalizes. Best to be careful. The guests left at 10 o'clock, and Clara escaped to her room with her nerves shredded and her corset too tight. And she was unlacing her dress when the knock came. Miss Whitby? Cassian's voice, low and urgent. I need to speak with you. Clara opened the door, improper, dangerous, and found him still dressed but disheveled, his careful control cracking at the edges. What's wrong? Lord Knox sent a message. He'll be calling tomorrow afternoon with members of his Reform Society to discuss the estate's support for their charitable work. Cassian's jaw tightened. He's coming here, Clara, to this house, and he'll want to meet with you. Her stomach dropped. Why me? Because you're new, vulnerable, a potential source or a potential weakness. He hasn't decided which yet. Cassian moved into the room, and Clara's pulse kicked as he closed the door behind him. Tomorrow, when he arrives, you'll be polite but distant. You'll take notes if asked. But you will not be alone with him, and you will not answer personal questions about this household or about me. I'm not going to betray you. I know, his voice softened. But Knox is very good at making people believe they have no choice. And I need you to understand. If he threatens you, if he offers you money or safety or a way out, you come to me first. Always. Clara's throat tightened. Why does this feel like you're preparing for war? Because I am. Cassian met her gaze, and Clara saw something raw in his eyes. Knox has been circling this estate for months. He's building something, a case, a scandal, a trap. And now he's met you, cataloged you, identified you as part of this household. That makes you a piece on his board. Then I'll have to be a piece that doesn't move the way he expects. Something flickered in Cassian's expression, approval, maybe, or pride. You're either very brave or very reckless, Miss Whitby. I'm very determined not to lose everything I fought for. Clara lifted her chin. So tell me what Knox really wants, and I'll help you stop him. For a moment, Cassian simply looked at her, really looked, as if seeing past the blue dress and careful manners to something underneath that surprised him. Then he said quietly, he wants to prove I'm unfit to hold this title, that my father's madness runs in my blood, and that I'm a danger to everyone around me. He paused. And the worst part is, some of it's true. Knox arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, and accompanied by two stern-looking gentlemen who introduced themselves as members of the Moral Reform Society's governing board. Clara sat in the corner of the drawing room, taking notes while the Dowager served tea and Cassian played the gracious host. But Knox's attention kept sliding to Clara, assessing, calculating, cataloging every nervous gesture and careful word. Miss Whitby, Knox said during a lull in conversation, his voice smooth as poison, I understand you've been assisting the Dowager with correspondence. How are you finding the work? Very manageable, my lord. Clara kept her voice neutral. The Dowager is an excellent teacher. I'm sure she is. Knox's smile never reached his eyes. And the Duke? I imagine working closely with him must be quite educational. There it was. In the same trap Miss Pemberton had laid at dinner. His Grace has been most professional, Clara said. As have I. Of course, Knox sipped his tea. Though I must say, it's unusual for a young woman of your education to accept a companion's position so far from London. One might wonder what circumstances led you here. Cassian's expression went perfectly blank, but Clara saw the warning in his eyes. Don't engage. Circumstances are rarely simple, my lord, Clara replied carefully. But I'm grateful for the opportunity. As you should be, Knox set down his cup. Though I do hope you understand that Morcant House has a rather troubled history. The late Duke suffered from severe mental instability in his final years. Episodes of violence, paranoia, complete loss of reason. His son. Knox's gaze slid to Cassian. I'd inherited the title very young. One can only hope he didn't inherit anything else. The room went very quiet. Cassian's voice was carved ice. My father's illness was tragic, Lord Knox, but it has no bearing on my fitness to manage this estate or serve my tenants. Doesn't it? Knox smiled. Hereditary conditions have a way of manifesting, Your Grace, sometimes quite suddenly, and when they do, the consequences can be catastrophic, not just for the afflicted, but for everyone in their sphere of influence. He turned to Clara. That's why our society exists, Miss Whitby, to protect the innocent from those who cannot control themselves. It was a threat wrapped in concern, delivered with the precision of a blade between ribs. Before Clara could respond, Knox produced a card and offered it to her, the same card he'd given her before, but this time in front of witnesses. Should you ever find yourself in need of assistance, Miss Whitby, legal counsel, safe accommodation, protection from an untenable situation, please don't hesitate to contact me. We have resources for young women trapped in difficult positions. Clara took the card because refusing would confirm his suspicions. Thank you, my lord. That's very kind. Kindness has nothing to do with it. Knox's gaze held hers. It's simply the right thing to do. The moment Knox's carriage disappeared down the drive, Cassian turned to Clara with barely controlled fury. He threatened you, in my house, in front of my mother. He offered me help, Clara corrected, though her hands were shaking. There's a difference. Not to him. Cassian's voice was rough. He just told everyone in that room, that he believes I'm dangerous and you're a potential victim. And now he's given you a way to contact him privately, which means he expects you to either accept his help or become evidence of my instability when you inevitably refuse it. Clara's throat tightened. What happens if I don't refuse? Then Knox wins. He proves I can't protect the people in my household, that I'm losing control, that I'm unfit. Cassian met her gaze. And you lose everything I promised you, wages, safety, your pension claim. Because Knox doesn't actually care about helping you, Clara. He cares about using you to destroy me. The words landed like stones. Then we make sure he never gets the chance. Clara straightened her spine. You said he's building something, a case, a scandal. And what would he need to make it stick? Documented evidence of erratic behavior, witness testimony from household staff or local families, medical opinions about hereditary instability. Cassian's expression darkened. And proof that I'm a danger to those around me, which means creating situations where I lose control and someone gets hurt. Then we don't give him those situations. It's not that simple. Cassian's voice went quiet. There are nights when I can't control what happens, when the condition my father had manifests, and I'm not safe to be around. The staff know to stay away. The house is locked down. But if Knox learns about those nights, if he witnesses one, he won't. Clara stepped closer, close enough to feel that electric charge between them. Because I'll help you make sure of it. Whatever you need, warnings, alibis, witness management, I'll do it. Cassian stared at her. Why would you risk that? Because you protected my pension claim when you didn't have to. Because you've kept every promise you made. And because Clara's breath caught. Because I don't believe you're the monster Knox is trying to prove you are. For a long moment, Cassian simply looked at her, something raw and dangerous in his eyes. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with careful, controlled gentleness that made Clara's skin flush with heat. You should be more careful who you trust, Miss Whitby. Perhaps. Clara's voice came out breathless. But I've already made my choice. The letter arrived by morning courier, and Clara knew it was bad before she even opened it. Inside, a formal notice from the Whitby family solicitors. But Thomas's pension claim had been officially challenged on grounds of insufficient documentation. Without proof of the marriage certificate, which had been destroyed in the fire that consumed Clara's former lodgings, the claim would be denied within 30 days. The floor tilted. Clara? Cassian appeared in the library doorway, and one look at her face made him cross to her side immediately. What happened? She handed him the letter wordlessly. His expression went black with rage. Knox did this. How could he possibly? He has connections. Lawyers? Money. Cassian's hands tightened on the paper. And he knows attacking your pension claim is the fastest way to make you desperate, to force you into a position where accepting his help seems like the only option. Clara's hands shook. The marriage certificate was destroyed, and I have nothing to prove. You have me. Cassian's voice was steel and promise. And I'm not letting Knox take this from you. He sent 3 telegrams to London within the hour, to solicitors, barristers, men who owed the Morkan family favors. By noon, he'd secured legal representation and bought Clara time. But the damage was done. Knox had proven he could reach into her life and shred it with a single letter. And worse, Clara's reputation was now visibly tied to Cassian's protection. The household staff had seen the courier, the urgency, the Duke personally intervening on behalf of his companion. Gossip would spread. Questions would be asked. By evening, the Dowager confirmed Clara's fears. Mrs. Thornton sent a note, Honoria said over dinner, her voice carefully neutral. I'm expressing concern about the amount of time you spend alone with Cassian in the library. She suggests it might be more appropriate for you to work in the parlor where staff can supervise. Clara's stomach sank. She thinks I'm compromising myself. She thinks Cassian is compromising you. The Dowager's gaze was sharp. And she's not wrong to worry, my dear. A young woman working closely with an unmarried duke, receiving special legal protection, dining at his table, it creates talk. Dangerous talk. Then what would you have me do? Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Stop doing the work you hired me for? Refuse the Duke's help with the pension claim? Let Knox destroy everything because propriety demands I keep my distance? I would have you be careful. Honoria's expression softened fractionally. Knox is building a case that Cassian is unstable and dangerous. If he can also prove that Cassian has compromised a vulnerable young woman in his household, ruined her reputation through inappropriate proximity, it strengthens his position considerably. You become evidence of moral degeneracy. Clara's throat tightened. So I'm trapped. If I stay close to the Duke, my reputation suffers. If I distance myself, I lose the protection that's keeping Knox from completely destroying me. Welcome to the reality of being a woman with no power, my dear. The Dowager's smile was bitter. We are always trapped. The only question is which trap offers the best chance of survival. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her room, mind spinning through impossible calculations. Knox had her cornered, attacking from 2 sides at once, are using her pension and her reputation as weapons. And the more Cassian tried to protect her, the more ammunition Knox gained. At midnight, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Then a voice, Cassian's, low and rough. Clara, I know you're awake. She opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, and the careful control he always wore was completely gone. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were dark and dangerous. And when he looked at her, Clara felt heat flood her skin. I can't do this, he said. Can't do what? Pretend I don't care if Knox destroys you. Pretend your reputation doesn't matter to me. Pretend that watching you trapped and frightened doesn't make me want to. He stopped himself, breathing hard. I should never have hired you. Never brought you into this. But now you're here and I can't. I won't let him take everything from you. Clara's pulse hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow night is a quiet night. The most dangerous one I have all month. Cassian's voice went rough. And I need you to understand what that means. Because if Knox finds out, if he witnesses what happens, it will give him everything he needs to destroy me, which means destroying you in the process. Clara's breath caught. Tell me the truth. All of it. Cassian met her gaze, and Clara saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. My father didn't die from madness, Clara. He died because he lost control of something hereditary, something violent, something that shouldn't exist, but does. He swallowed. And tomorrow night, I'm going to lose control of it too. The staff know to lock down the East Wing, to stay away, and to survive the night and pretend it never happened. She began to notice the subtle cues, a tilt of the Dowager's head that sent a maid moving in a specific direction, a low hum of conversation that stilled when Clara entered a room only to resume at some unspoken signal. It was more than just household hierarchy. It was a second, silent language of command and response that flowed around and through the formal structure of the estate. Once she overheard a young footman, pale after a quiet night, murmur the Luna's orders to another before both fell silent at her approach. The word meant nothing to her, but the reverence in his tone was unmistakable. Then tell me. I can't. Not here. Not now. Cassian stepped back, putting distance between them. But tomorrow, after it's over, I'll tell you everything. And then you can decide if you still want to stay. He left before Clara could respond, the corridor swallowing him like the dark. And Clara stood in her doorway with her heart racing and her skin electric from proximity to something dangerous she still didn't fully understand. Tomorrow night she would learn the truth. Tomorrow night, everything would change. The instructions came at 8 o'clock sharp, delivered by the housekeeper in a sealed envelope. Remain in your quarters until dawn. Lock your door. Do not respond to anyone who knocks or calls your name. Do not investigate sounds from the east wing or the grounds. This is not a request. Clara locked her door, changed into her nightdress, and sat by the window with a book she couldn't focus on. The house went quiet around her. Too quiet. At 10 o'clock, and she heard the east wing door slam, heavy bolts sliding into place. Then footsteps, multiple people moving through the corridors with military precision, checking locks, securing exits. At 11, the household staff retreated to their quarters. Windows went dark. The great house settled into an unnatural stillness that made Clara's skin crawl. At midnight, she heard the first sound. Not from inside the house, from outside, from the grounds beyond her window. Clara set down her book and crossed to the glass, her pulse quickening as she looked out across the moonlit moors, and froze. There, near the garden wall, movement in the shadows. Two figures, dark against the fog. Men, she thought at first, but they moved wrong, too low, too fluid. She pressed closer to the window, breath fogging the glass. Not men, wolves, two of them, and massive and silver gray in the moonlight, circling something near the gate. No, not something. Someone. A third wolf, larger than the others, midnight black with silver along its spine, stood between them and the wall with its hackles raised and teeth bared. Clara's rational mind tried to catalog what she was seeing. Wild animals, perhaps. A pack that had wandered onto the estate. Guards would handle it. This wasn't her concern. But then the black wolf moved, and Clara's breath stopped. She recognized that fluid grace, that controlled power, that predatory elegance that made her pulse spike, even when she knew she should be terrified. Cassian. The two gray wolves lunged. The black wolf, Cassian, met them with explosive violence that was beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. Teeth and claws and speed that shouldn't be possible. One gray wolf went down hard, yelping. The other retreated, limping. But then a new sound. Men's voices, shouting. Lights bobbing through the fog near the tree line. Hunters. Clara's stomach dropped as she understood. This wasn't a random attack. This was a trap. Someone had sent wolves, or men who became wolves, onto Morcant grounds to draw Cassian out, to make him shift, to create witnesses, knocks. The black wolf's head snapped toward the approaching lights. For a moment it stood frozen, caught between protecting the territory and preserving the secret. Then it made a choice. It charged toward the hunters, not to attack them, but to drive them back, to scare them away from the estate without killing them. Clara watched, heart in her throat, as Cassian's wolf form herded the men toward the tree line with snarls and feints that sent them scrambling back. One man raised a rifle. "No," Clara whispered. But another knocked the barrel down. Voices, arguing. Then they retreated into the fog, taking the wounded gray wolves with them. The black wolf stood at the gate for a long moment, breathing hard, surveying the grounds for other threats. Then it looked up, directly at Clara's window. Golden eyes met hers across the distance, and Clara felt something electric and terrifying and impossible lock into place between them. Recognition, connection, the pull of something she had no name for. Then the wolf turned and vanished into the east wing through a concealed entrance Clara hadn't known existed. She sank onto the bed, hands shaking, mind racing. Cassian was a werewolf. At the entire household, the staff, the tenants, possibly the Dowager herself knew, covered for him, locked down the estate on quiet nights to keep the secret safe. And Knox suspected, had sent rogues or hunters or both to force Cassian to shift, to gather evidence, to prove the hereditary madness was something far more dangerous. Clara should pack her trunk. should run, should escape before she became collateral damage in a war between supernatural secrets and human law. Instead, she pulled on her wrapper and unlocked her door. The corridors were still dark, still quiet, but Clara moved through them with purpose, following the path she'd seen the Black Wolf take, until she reached a servant's entrance to the east wing she'd never been allowed to access. The door was unlocked. Clara pushed it open and stepped inside. She found him in what looked like a private study, smaller and more Spartan than the main library. He was human again, dressed hastily in trousers and a shirt that wasn't fully buttoned. And when he turned and saw her, his expression went from shock to fury to something that looked like despair. "You should be in your room. You were going to tell me the truth tomorrow," Clara said, closing the door behind her. "But I already know. I saw you. I saw what you are." Cassian's hands flexed at his sides. "Then you should be running." "I'm not running." Clara crossed to him, her pulse hammering. "I'm demanding the truth you promised me, all of it, right now." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then the fight went out of him. "My father died 10 years ago in this wing, after losing his mind completely. The doctors called it hereditary madness, but it wasn't." Cassian's voice was rough. "It was this, the wolf. A bloodline curse that turns us into predators on certain moons or when we're under extreme stress. My father couldn't control it. At the end, the wolf was all that was left. He couldn't shift back, couldn't remember who he was." Clara's chest ached. "And you're afraid that's your future." "I know it's my future." He met her gaze. "Every month it gets harder to come back. Every shift lasts longer. And tonight I nearly lost control completely. If those hunters had pushed harder, if they'd threatened the house, I would have torn them apart and proven everything Knox believes about me. But you didn't." Clara stepped closer. "You drove them away without killing them. You protected the territory and kept the secret." This time, Cassian's laugh was bitter. "But Knox knows now. He sent those rogues, wolves from another territory, probably paid or coerced. He orchestrated this to create witnesses and gather evidence. And he'll do it again. Bigger, more public. Until I fail." Clara's mind raced. "Then we make sure you don't fail. We prepare for his attacks. We control the narrative before he can twist it." "How?" "I don't know yet." Clara moved closer still, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he was barely holding himself together. "But I'm not leaving, Cassian. I'm not giving Knox the satisfaction of driving me away or using me as evidence against you. So you're going to have to trust that I'm clever enough and stubborn enough to help you survive this." Cassian reached out. I caught her hand in his, and the touch sent electricity racing up Clara's arm. "You're the most dangerous woman I've ever met," he said quietly. "Good," Clara's pulse hammered. "Because Knox is playing for keeps, and he's about to learn that I am too." They stood like that for a long moment, too close, breathing too hard, balanced on the edge of something neither could afford but couldn't seem to resist. Then Cassian raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a brand and a promise both. "Partners," he whispered. "Partners," Clara agreed, even as heat flooded her skin and her heart threatened to break free of her chest. And somewhere in the distance, toward town, wolves howled. The war with Knox had truly begun. Clara woke to find a note slipped under her door, unwritten in Cassian's precise hand. "The staff believe you spent last night in your room as instructed. Let them continue believing it. Meet me in the conservatory at 7. We need to plan our next move." She dressed quickly, her mind still reeling from everything she'd witnessed. Cassian was a werewolf. The household was a pack. Knox was hunting them with the law as his weapon. And Clara had just chosen to stay in the middle of a war she barely understood. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something closer to determination. The conservatory was empty when she arrived, morning light filtering through the glass roof and turning the exotic plants into shadows and gold. Cassian stood near the fountain, already dressed for the day, and when he turned to face her, Clara saw exhaustion etched into every line of his body. "You're still here," he said quietly. "Where else would I be? Packing your trunk, hiring a carriage, putting as much distance between yourself and this house as possible." His gaze searched hers. You saw what I am, Clara, what I could become. And you're still standing here like it doesn't matter. It matters. Clara moved closer. But not in the way you think. You didn't hurt those hunters last night. You could have. I saw how easily you moved, how much power you had, but you chose restraint instead. That tells me more about who you are than anything Knox could fabricate. Cassian's expression shifted, something raw and grateful and dangerous all at once. Knox sent those rogues deliberately. He's escalating, testing my control, gathering witnesses, building his case. As in last night proved he's willing to risk lives to get what he wants. Then we need to move faster. Clara's mind was already racing through possibilities. The leak, Merritt's correspondence with London. Is that how Knox knows when to strike? When you're vulnerable? Probably. If Merritt reports my schedule, my movements, the timing of quiet nights, Knox would know exactly when to apply pressure. Cassian's hands flexed. But I can't confront Merritt without proof. He's been with this family for 15 years. Accusing him of treason without evidence would split the household. Then we get evidence. Clara pulled out her notebook, the one she'd been using to track correspondence patterns. I've documented every letter Merritt sent to London in the past month. The timing, the coded language, the addresses. But what I need is the response. If Knox or his people are writing back with instructions, those letters would prove the connection. Cassian went very still. Merritt receives all household post before distributing it. If there are return letters, he'd intercept them. Where would he keep them? His office. Locked desk, probably. Or, Cassian's expression darkened. In his private rooms in the servants' wing, somewhere he controls completely. Clara's pulse quickened. Can you get me access? Clara, I'm already part of this, she interrupted. Knox threatened me, attacked my pension claim, identified me as a target. So let me be useful. Let me find the proof we need to expose Merritt and cut off Knox's intelligence source. For a long moment, Cassian simply looked at her. Then he nodded slowly. Tonight, after the household retires, I'll create a distraction, something that pulls Merritt away from his rooms for at least 20 minutes. You search. But Clara, if you're caught, there will be consequences I can't protect you from. Merritt is well liked among the staff. They'll believe him over you. Then I won't get caught. The distraction came at 11 o'clock sharp, a tenant emergency that required the steward's immediate attention at the south gate. Merritt left his rooms in a hurry, keys jangling, and Clara slipped inside the moment the corridor was clear. His quarters were sparse, methodical, obsessively organized. Desk drawers labeled and locked, ledgers stacked with military precision, and tucked in the back of a cabinet behind cleaning supplies, a small wooden box with a brass lock. Clara's hands shook as she picked the lock with a hairpin, her breath coming fast and shallow. The box opened with a soft click. Inside, letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Silas Merritt from various London sources. Clara scanned them quickly, her heart hammering as the pieces fell into place. Instructions about when to report the Duke's movements, payments for information about household routines, and Clara's breath stopped. Specific questions about whether the Duke showed signs of his father's affliction. But it was the last letter that made Clara's blood run cold. Continue monitoring. Lord Knox requires confirmation before proceeding with the final phase. If the subject exhibits violent instability on or before the autumn equinox, we move forward with confinement proceedings. Your cooperation will be rewarded as promised. And then at the bottom, in different handwriting, the officer's widow is proving useful. Her presence creates the perfect scandal if needed. Ensure she remains compromised. Clara's hands trembled as she read it again. The officer's widow. They meant her. Knox had known about her from the beginning, had possibly arranged for the forged reference himself, not to help her but to plant her in Cassian's household as a future weapon. She was never hired to find the leak. She was always meant to be part of the trap. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made Clara's stomach drop. She shoved the letters back into the box, relocked it, and slipped toward the door. Miss Whitby. Merritt stood in the doorway, his expression perfectly calm and absolutely lethal. I believe you're in the wrong wing of the house. Clara's mind raced. Lie, deflect, and create a plausible excuse. But Merritt's gaze had already moved to the cabinet, to the box that wasn't quite aligned the way he'd left it. And Clara saw the moment he understood exactly what she'd been doing. "You went through my personal effects," he said quietly. "I was looking for evidence." Clara lifted her chin, refused to let him see her terror. "And I found it. Letters from Knox's people, payment records, instructions to monitor the Duke and report his movements. You've been selling information to the man trying to destroy this household." Merritt's expression didn't change. "I've been protecting this household from a man who's losing his mind. Just like his father did. Just like his grandfather did before him." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You don't understand what you're part of, Miss Whitby. But you think the Duke is some tragic hero fighting against unjust persecution. But I've watched 3 generations of Morkant men descend into violent madness. I've cleaned up their messes. I've lied to magistrates and doctors and neighbors to keep their secrets. And I will not watch another one destroy everything this estate represents. So you betrayed him to Knox. I tried to save him." Merritt's voice was cold. "Lord Knox's society offers treatment, humane confinement, medical intervention that might actually help before it's too late. But the Duke refuses to admit he needs it. He'd rather risk everyone around him than accept the truth." Clara's throat tightened. "And me? What was I supposed to be in this plan?" "Insurance." Merritt moved closer. "A vulnerable young woman compromised by proximity to an unstable Duke, who could testify to his erratic behavior when the time came. Lord Knox thought you'd be grateful for rescue, that your desperate circumstances would make you cooperative." His gaze sharpened. "But you've become a problem, Miss Whitby. You're too loyal, too clever, and now you've found evidence that could ruin everything we've worked toward. Lord Knox isn't the villain you think he is. He's a man trying to prevent tragedy before it happens. And I'm helping him because it's the right thing to do." Merritt reached for the bell pull. "Now you're going to return to your room while I explain to the Dowager that you were found snooping in restricted areas. Your contract will be terminated. You'll leave Morkant House tomorrow morning, and you'll forget everything you think you learned here." Clara's pulse hammered. This was it. Her choice. Accept defeat and leave with nothing, or fight and risk everything. She chose fight. "No," Clara said. Merritt's hand froze on the bell pull. "No? I'm not leaving, I'm not forgetting, and I'm not letting you destroy the Duke because you're too much of a coward to see the difference between illness and something else entirely." Clara's voice shook but held. "You want to call the Dowager? Do it. But I'll tell her everything, about the letters, about Knox's payments, about your plan to use me as a witness. And we'll see who she believes." For a moment, Merritt simply stared at her. Then he smiled, and it was not kind. "You're right, we will see." He rang the bell. The Dowager arrived within minutes, already dressed despite the late hour, and the moment she saw Clara in Merritt's room, her expression went glacial. "I explained," she said. Merritt bowed. "Miss Whitby was found searching my private quarters without permission, Your Grace. I believe she was looking for household correspondence, possibly to sell information to outside parties." Clara's stomach dropped. He'd flipped the accusation. "That's a lie," Clara said. "I was looking for evidence that Merritt is selling information to Lord Knox. Evidence I found, letters, payment records, instructions to monitor the Duke's movements, and report them to Knox's Reform Society." Honoria's gaze moved to the cabinet, to the box, then back to Merritt. "Is this true?" "Of course not, Your Grace." Merritt's voice was perfectly calm. "Miss Whitby has been under considerable stress since Lord Knox challenged her pension claim. I believe she's attempting to manufacture evidence to discredit anyone she perceives as a threat. It's quite sad, really." "Then you won't mind if I examine the contents of that box," Honoria said. Merritt's expression didn't flicker. "Not at all, Your Grace." He opened the box with his key and stepped back. Empty. Clara's breath stopped. The letters, all of them, were gone. "As you can see," Merritt said quietly, "there's nothing here but household supplies. Miss Whitby's accusations are baseless." Clara's mind raced. He'd removed the evidence. Somehow, in the brief moment between her leaving and his return, he'd hidden the letters somewhere she'd never find them. "I saw them," Clara said desperately. "Letters from Knox's people, instructions about the Duke, payments." "Miss Whitby." The Dowager's voice was cold. That you will return to your room. We will discuss your future employment in the morning. It was a dismissal and a condemnation both. Clara met Cassian's mother's gaze and saw something there. Not quite belief, but not quite disbelief either. A calculation. A weighing of loyalties. Your Grace. Now, Miss Whitby. Clara had no choice. She left Merritt's room with her hands shaking and her mind spinning, and returned to her quarters, knowing she'd just lost the first major battle. But she wasn't done fighting. She found Cassian in the East Wing study at midnight, and the moment he saw her face, he knew. What happened? Clara told him everything. The letters, Merritt's confession, the empty box, the Dowager's dismissal. When she finished, Cassian's expression was black with controlled fury. As he played you. I know. Clara's throat was tight. I should have taken the letters with me, should have anticipated he'd remove the evidence. But I didn't, and now I look like exactly what Knox wanted. A desperate woman manufacturing accusations. You're not desperate. Cassian moved closer, close enough that Clara could feel the heat of him. You're brilliant and brave, and you just confirmed what we needed to know. Merritt is the leak. Knox is coordinating the attacks, and they're planning something for the autumn equinox. Clara blinked. How is that helpful when I have no proof? Because now we know their timeline. The equinox is 3 days away. Whatever Knox is planning, his final move to prove I'm unfit and have me confined, it happens then. Cassian's gaze held hers. Which means we have 3 days to outmaneuver him. How? By giving him exactly what he wants. Cassian's smile was sharp and dangerous. He expects me to lose control, to prove his case for him. So we make him think that's exactly what's happening, and then we turn it against him. Clara's pulse quickened. You want to fake an episode. I want to create a situation where Knox commits himself publicly to accusations he can't prove, where he reveals his network and his methods in front of witnesses who matter. Cassian's voice dropped. But it's going to be dangerous, Clara, for both of us. And I need to know you're willing to see it through. Clara thought about the empty box, about Merritt's cold smile, about Knox's card burning in her pocket, and the pension claim hanging by a thread. And she thought about the wolf she'd seen fighting on the grounds, powerful and controlled and choosing restraint when violence would have been easier. I'm willing, she said, even if it means risking your reputation, your safety, everything you fought for. Especially then. Clara stepped closer, close enough to see gold flecks in his gray eyes. Because I'm not just fighting for employment anymore, Cassian. I'm fighting for this. For you. For the chance to prove that Knox doesn't get to win just because he has money and law on his side. Something shifted in Cassian's expression, raw and grateful and full of something Clara didn't have a name for, but felt like falling. You're going to get hurt, he said quietly. Probably. Clara's pulse hammered. But I'd rather get hurt fighting than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference. Cassian reached out, cupped her face in his hands with a gentleness that made Clara's breath catch. When this is over, when Knox is finished and you're safe, I'm going to tell you exactly how extraordinary you are. You could tell me now. If I start now, I won't stop. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and heat flooded Clara's skin. And we have work to do. He stepped back, putting proper distance between them, and Clara felt the loss like a physical ache. Tomorrow, Cassian said, his voice rough with restraint, we start building our trap. The betrayal came at breakfast. Clara descended to find the Dowager already seated, along with a man she didn't recognize, older, well-dressed, carrying a leather satchel that marked him as professional. Miss Whitby, Honoria said, this is Mr. Thorne, our family solicitor. He's come from London with some information you should hear. Clara's stomach sank as she took her seat. Information? Thorne opened his satchel and withdrew a folder. Regarding the death of Lieutenant Thomas Whitby 2 years ago. The official report states he died in a training accident, a fall from his horse during maneuvers. However, I've obtained additional documentation that tells a different story. Clara's hands went cold. What documentation? A letter from Thomas's commanding officer to the regimental quartermaster, dated 3 days before his death. Thorne slid the paper across the table. In it, the lieutenant expresses concern about unusual activity near Morcant territories, specifically Reports of large predators attacking livestock in a pattern inconsistent with natural animal behavior. He requested permission to investigate. The room tilted. Thomas never mentioned investigating anything, Clara said, but her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Because he was ordered to stand down, Thorne continued. The regiment wanted no involvement in local disputes, but according to witness statements I've uncovered, the lieutenant ignored those orders. He came to this region. He was seen asking questions in the village about the Morcant estate and the late Duke's episodes. No. The word came out as a whisper. He was found dead 3 days later. The official cause was a riding accident, but the medical examiner's private notes, which were sealed and only recently obtained, suggest severe trauma inconsistent with a fall. Wounds that looked more like an animal attack. Clara couldn't breathe. Thomas had come here, had investigated Cassian's father, had discovered something about the wolves, and died for it. You're saying the Duke's father killed my fiancé, Clara said numbly. I'm saying the timing is suspicious, Thorne replied carefully. And I'm saying that Lord Knox has been investigating the Morcant family for years, precisely because unusual deaths seem to cluster around their territory. Your fiancé may have been one of many casualties. The Dowager's expression was unreadable. Why are you telling Miss Whitby this now? Because Lord Knox requested I inform her. He believes she has a right to know what she's protecting. Thorne's gaze moved to Clara. He also wants you to understand that he's not the villain in this story, Miss Whitby. And he's trying to prevent more deaths, more cover-ups, more families destroyed by a legacy that should have ended generations ago. Clara stood on shaking legs. I need to speak with the Duke. The Duke is currently unavailable, Honoria said. He left for the village this morning and won't return until evening. Perhaps you should rest, my dear. This is clearly distressing news. It wasn't a suggestion. Clara returned to her room with her world crumbling around her and one terrible question burning through her mind. Had Cassian known? Had he known Thomas died investigating his father and hired her anyway, not to find a leak, but to keep her close and controllable? Was this entire alliance just another manipulation? She didn't see Cassian until that evening, and when he finally appeared at her door, Clara's carefully constructed composure shattered. Did you know? The words came out sharp as broken glass. Did you know my fiancé came here investigating your father? That he died on your lands? Cassian's expression went carefully blank. Who told you? Thorne, Knox's solicitor. He had documentation, witness statements, medical notes. Her voice broke. Thomas was asking questions about attacks, about predators, about your father's episodes. And 3 days later, he was dead. So tell me the truth, Cassian. Did your father kill him? The silence stretched like an eternity. Then Cassian said quietly, I don't know. You don't know? My father was barely lucid in his final year. There were nights he shifted and we couldn't track where he went or what he did. We'd find him at dawn, sometimes miles from the estate, sometimes covered in He stopped himself. Thomas Whitby died during one of my father's worst periods. I can't prove he was responsible, but I can't prove he wasn't. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. And you hired me anyway, knowing Thomas might have died because of your family, knowing I was entitled to answers, and you gave me none. I hired you because you deserved better than destitution, and I could offer you safety. Cassian's voice was fierce. And yes, I should have told you about Thomas. I should have been honest from the beginning. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave? Afraid you'd hate me? Afraid I'd lose the one person who looked at me like I was worth saving instead of a problem to solve. So you manipulated me instead. I protected you. Cassian moved closer, and Clara saw desperation in his eyes. Art Knox is using this to turn you against me, to make you doubt everything we've built. Don't let him win, Clara, please. You made me your strategist, Clara said, her voice trembling with a fury born of betrayal. You trusted me with your secrets, with your territory, with your life. But you withheld the single most critical piece of intelligence. How can I plan a defense when the man I'm defending might be responsible for the greatest loss of my life? My mind can't work around a lie that big, Cassian. It just stops. Then ask me, Cassian's voice cracked. Ask me anything. I'll tell you the truth. All of it. No more secrets. Clara met his gaze, saw the raw pain there, and felt her heart break for both of them. Did you care about me before you learned I could be useful? Cassian flinched like she'd struck him. Yes, God help me. Yes, from the moment you refused to be frightened. From the first time you asked the questions no one else dared to ask. I cared, Clara. I still care. And that's why I should have told you everything. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the connection between them was real and not just another thread in Knox's web. But she couldn't, not yet. Not until her head stopped spinning and her heart stopped fracturing. I need time, she whispered. How much time? I don't know. She stepped back, putting distance between them. But I can't fight for you until I know what I'm fighting for. Until I know if the man I'm protecting is worth protecting. Cassian nodded slowly, something dying in his eyes. Then I'll give you time. But Clara, the equinox is tomorrow night. Whatever you decide. You need to be safe when Knox makes his move. Promise me you'll stay in your room. Lock the door, don't get involved. I can't promise that. Then promise me you'll survive. His voice was raw. Even if you hate me, even if you leave the moment this is over, just survive. He left before Clara could respond, and she stood in her room with her heart in pieces and a terrible choice looming. Believe Cassian and risk being manipulated. Or believe Knox and risk abandoning the one man who'd ever made her feel like she mattered. Clara didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at her desk and thought like the strategist Thomas had trained her to be. Not with her heart, but with cold, ruthless logic. Facts. Merritt was feeding information to Knox, proven by the letters, and even if they were now hidden, Knox wanted Cassian confined and the estate seized, proven by his public threats and legal maneuvering. Thomas had died investigating Morkant territory, proven by Thorne's documentation. Cassian's father had been a wolf who lost control, confirmed by Cassian himself. But here was what Clara also knew. Cassian had protected her pension claim when he didn't have to. He'd been honest about the wolf after she witnessed it. He'd given her choices, even when it cost him strategically. He'd chosen restraint over violence every time Clara had witnessed him shift. And Knox had attacked her pension to make her desperate. Knox had threatened her publicly to isolate her. Knox had sent rogues to force Cassian to shift in front of witnesses. Knox was using her fiancé's death as a weapon, and not because he cared about justice, but because it served his agenda. The pattern was clear. Knox wasn't trying to save people from a dangerous man. He was trying to destroy a powerful family and seize their territory. And he was using law, scandal, and Clara's own grief as tools to do it. Which meant Clara had one choice: stop him before he could execute whatever he had planned for the equinox. At dawn, she dressed in her most respectable day dress, pinned her hair with ruthless precision, and left Morkant House without telling anyone where she was going. She had a magistrate to see. Mr. Edmund Gray was the local magistrate, a fair man, according to village gossip, who'd served the district for 20 years and had no particular love for London aristocrats, who thought they could buy justice. Clara found him at his office in the village, and when she asked for a private audience, he agreed with the wariness of a man accustomed to complicated requests. Miss Whitby, I understand you're employed at Morkant House. I am, sir, and I have information about a conspiracy to defame the Duke and seize his estate through fraudulent means. Clara set her notebook on his desk. I've documented evidence of a coordinated campaign by Lord Percival Knox and his Reform Society to manufacture proof of the Duke's mental instability. I believe they're planning to force a public incident tomorrow night, the autumn equinox, and use it as grounds for confinement. Gray's expression sharpened. That's a serious accusation. I have correspondence patterns, witness statements, and documentation of threats made against both the Duke and myself. Clara opened her notebook. I also have reason to believe that Knox has bribed or coerced members of the Morkant household staff to provide false testimony about the Duke's behavior. What do you want from me? I want you present tomorrow night, as an independent witness. Whatever Knox orchestrates, whatever incident he creates, I want legal authority there to see it for what it really is. Entrapment, not evidence. Gray studied her for a long moment. Lord Knox has considerable influence in London. If you're wrong about this, Miss Whitby, It could destroy your credibility permanently. And if I'm right, it could save an innocent man from being confined for crimes he didn't commit. Clara met his gaze steadily. I'm willing to stake my reputation on it, sir. The question is whether you're willing to witness the truth. Gray was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded slowly. I'll be there, but Miss Whitby, if this is some scheme to protect an employer you've become inappropriately attached to, I will not hesitate to document that as well. I understand, sir. All I ask is that you judge based on what you see, not what you've been told. Clara returned to Morcant House by mid-morning to find chaos. The Dowager met her at the door, her expression thunderous. Where have you been? The village. I needed air. You left without permission or escort. That's unacceptable. Honoria's gaze raked over her. Lord Knox is arriving this afternoon with members of his society and a physician. They claim they have new evidence of the Duke's deteriorating mental state and are requesting a formal evaluation. Clara's stomach dropped. He's moving early. He's moving because someone tipped him off that we might be preparing a defense. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. Was that you, Miss Whitby? Did you go to Knox and tell him we know about his plans? No. Clara's voice was steady. I went to Magistrate Gray and asked him to witness whatever happens tonight, to ensure there's independent legal authority present who can't be bought or influenced. The Dowager went very still. You did what? I protected the Duke the only way I know how, by making sure the truth has a witness who matters. Clara lifted her chin. Knox is planning something for the equinox tonight, an incident he can use as proof. But if the magistrate is here to see it unfold, Knox can't twist the narrative. For a long moment, Honoria simply stared at her. Then, slowly, something like respect flickered in her eyes. You're either brilliant or suicidal, child. Probably both. Clara's hands shook, but her voice held. Where is the Duke? East Wing, preparing. The Dowager's expression softened fractionally. He thinks you hate him, you know. Thinks you'll leave the moment this is over. I might, Clara admitted, but not until I know he's safe. The confrontation came at sunset. Knox arrived with his physician, 2 legal clerks, and Magistrate Gray, who'd been invited separately and now looked distinctly uncomfortable about being part of whatever was unfolding. They gathered in the drawing room while Clara took notes from the corner, her pulse hammering as Knox laid out his case with surgical precision. Your Grace, Knox said to the Dowager, I'm here out of concern for your son's well-being and the safety of everyone on this estate. We have documented evidence of increasingly erratic behavior, isolation, unexplained absences, violent outbursts reported by staff, and a pattern that mirrors exactly what the late Duke exhibited before his tragic decline. What staff? Cassian's voice was ice as he entered the room. Name them. Silas Merritt has provided testimony under oath. Knox smiled, as have 3 housemaids who claim to have witnessed concerning incidents. Merritt stepped forward, his expression respectful and deeply sad. Your Grace, I take no pleasure in this, but I've watched you deteriorate for months. The angry outbursts, the nights you can't account for, the way you've isolated yourself from society. It's exactly how your father began. That's a lie, Clara said before she could stop herself. Knox's gaze swung to her. Miss Whitby, how good of you to join us. I understand you've been working very closely with the Duke. Tell me, have you ever felt unsafe in his presence? It was a trap. If she said yes, she confirmed Knox's narrative. If she said no, Knox would claim she was too compromised to be objective. Clara chose a third option. I felt unsafe exactly once since arriving at Morcant House, she said clearly. The night Lord Knox's associates sent rogue wolves onto the estate to attack, and the Duke protected the household from them. That's the only violence I've witnessed. Violence Knox himself orchestrated. The room went silent. Knox's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation, Miss Whitby. As is yours. My lord? Clara stood, her hands steady now, despite the fear coursing through her. You claim the Duke is dangerously unstable, but I've worked beside him for nearly 2 weeks. I've seen him manage difficult tenants, navigate complex legal matters, and maintain absolute control even under extreme stress. The only person creating danger here is you. The girl is clearly compromised, Merritt said smoothly. emotionally attached. Her judgment cannot be trusted. Then trust mine, Magistrate Gray said, speaking for the first time. I've known the Morcant family for 20 years. I've seen no evidence of the instability Lord Knox describes. And frankly, this entire proceeding feels less like concern and more like harassment. Knox's smile never wavered. Which is why I've arranged for a more objective evaluation, Doctor. That Fielding is one of London's foremost experts on hereditary madness. He's examined the late Duke's medical records and is prepared to conduct a formal assessment. He turned to Cassian. Unless, Your Grace, you have reason to refuse? It was a perfect trap. Refuse and appear guilty. Submit and risk being diagnosed based on predetermined conclusions. Cassian met Clara's gaze across the room, and something passed between them. Trust, maybe, or shared understanding. I'll submit to examination, Cassian said, but only if Miss Whitby and Magistrate Gray are present as witnesses. Knox's expression flickered with annoyance, but he couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. Very well. The examination took place in the library, and within 10 minutes, Clara understood exactly what Knox had planned. Doctor, and Fielding asked questions designed to produce concerning answers. Do you ever experience gaps in memory? Have you felt urges toward violence? Do you hear voices or see things others don't? Every question was a trap. Every answer could be twisted. But Cassian answered with careful honesty, acknowledging the condition without confirming madness. I experience episodes related to a hereditary neurological disorder. I manage them through isolation during peak symptoms. I've never harmed anyone under my care. But you've harmed people outside your care, Fielding pounced. I've defended my territory from trespassers, as is my legal right. The physician made notes that looked damning even from across the room. Then Knox played his final card. Dr. Fielding, what would you recommend as treatment? Given the family history and current symptoms, I would recommend supervised confinement in a private asylum, somewhere the subject can be monitored and prevented from harming himself or others during episodes. Clara's breath stopped. That was it. That was Knox's endgame. Not legal proceedings or public scandal, just a physician's recommendation that Cassian was dangerous and needed to be locked away for his own good. And once he was confined, Knox could seize the estate through legal manipulation while Cassian was powerless to fight back. No, Clara stood, her voice ringing through the library. I won't let you do this. Knox turned to her with false sympathy. Miss Whitby, I understand you formed an attachment, but surely you can see? I see a physician who's been paid to deliver a predetermined diagnosis. I see a lord who's orchestrated attacks and manufactured evidence. And I see a magistrate who's witnessing attempted entrapment of an innocent man. Clara's hands shook, but her voice held. The Duke isn't mad. He's not dangerous, and I can prove it. How? Knox's smile was condescending. Because tonight is the equinox, the night you've been planning for, the night you expect him to lose control and validate everything you've claimed. Clara met Cassian's gaze, saw understanding dawn in his eyes. But he won't. Because whatever happens tonight, I'll be there. And if the Duke is truly the monster you claim, Lord Knox, then I should be in terrible danger. So let's find out. The room erupted in protests, Honoria objecting, Merritt calling it improper, Knox warning of consequences, but Magistrate Gray raised his hand for silence. Miss Whitby has a point. If the Duke is as dangerous as you claim, Lord Knox, then surely tonight's equinox should demonstrate that clearly. And if he's not, then these proceedings are baseless and should be dismissed. He looked at Cassian. Your Grace, do you accept this test? Cassian's gaze never left Clara's. If Miss Whitby is willing to put herself at risk, then yes, I accept. Then we reconvene at midnight in the East Garden, Gray said, and we settle this definitively. The hours before midnight dragged like years. Clara paced her room, mind racing through scenarios. Cassian would shift. She knew that much. The equinox would trigger the change, whether he wanted it or not. But Knox was expecting violence, or proof that Cassian couldn't control the wolf. So they had to prove the opposite. At 11:30, Clara descended to the East Garden to find torches lit and a crowd gathered. Knox and his people, Magistrate Gray, even the Dowager wrapped in a cloak against the night chill. Cassian stood at the center of the garden, alone, and when he saw Clara, something broke in his expression. "You shouldn't be here." "I made a promise." Clara crossed to him, heart hammering. "I said I'd see this through, so here I am." "Clara," his voice cracked. "I don't know if I can control it tonight. The pull is already starting, and if I hurt you, you won't." She reached up, cupped his face in her hands the way he'd done to her days ago. "Because you're not your father. You're not the monster Knox thinks you are. You're the man who chose restraint over violence, who protected me even when it cost you, who trusted me with the truth when you could have kept lying. I should have told you about Thomas." "Yes," Clara's throat tightened. "But you're telling me now. You're giving me the choice to stay or go, and I'm choosing to stay." Cassian's hands came up to cover hers, his grip almost painful. "I love you. I need you to know that before." "Tell me after." Clara's pulse raced as she saw his eyes start to change, gold bleeding through gray. "After you prove Knox wrong. After we win." The transformation started as the clock struck midnight. Clara stepped back, giving him space, her breath coming fast as she watched Cassian's body shift and change, bones restructuring, muscles reforming, fur replacing skin in a wave of silver black that was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. But Clara stood her ground as the massive black wolf that was Cassian turned to face her with eyes that still held recognition, still held that careful control. Knox's voice rang out. "You see? The creature is loose. Miss Whitby, get away from it before—" "Before what?" Clara's voice was steadier despite her hammering heart. She held out her hand to the wolf. "Before he demonstrates exactly how much control he has?" The wolf's gaze locked on hers. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Clara thought she'd miscalculated. That the wolf would attack, that Cassian would be lost to instinct, that Knox would win. Then the wolf lowered its head and pressed its muzzle into her palm. The trust in that gesture, and the choice to be gentle when violence would have been so easy, made Clara's breath catch. She stroked the fur between his ears, felt the power thrumming under her fingers, and turned to face Magistrate Gray. "Does this look like dangerous madness to you, sir? Or does it look like a man maintaining absolute control even in circumstances deliberately designed to break him?" Gray stared, speechless. Knox's face went purple with rage. "This proves nothing. The creature could turn at any moment." "Then let it." Clara's voice rang clear. "Let the Duke remain shifted. Let everyone here witness whether he attacks or whether he chooses restraint. Because that's the real test, isn't it? Not whether he has this condition, but whether he controls it." The wolf, Cassian, turned to face Knox and the assembled crowd. And did nothing. No attack. No violence. Just careful, controlled presence that radiated power without threat. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. The wolf never moved except to stay between Clara and the crowd, protective but not aggressive. Finally, Magistrate Gray spoke. "I've seen enough. Whatever condition the Duke suffers from, it's clearly managed and poses no threat to those around him. Lord Knox, unless you have actual evidence of harm, not speculation or manufactured crisis, these proceedings are dismissed." Knox's expression turned venomous. "This isn't over." "Yes," the Dowager said coldly. "It is. Leave my property, Lord Knox, and if you return, I'll have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." The crowd dispersed slowly, Knox leaving with threats that rang hollow, Magistrate Gray promising a formal report clearing Cassian of all accusations. And when they were finally alone in the garden, the wolf shifted back, a process Clara watched with held breath as Cassian reformed, human again, naked and shaking with exhaustion. She wrapped her cloak around him without hesitation. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." His voice was raw. "You stood there, Clara. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. Why?" "Because," Clara's throat was tight with emotion she could barely name. "Because somewhere between being hired and being manipulated and learning terrible truths, I stopped fighting for survival and started fighting for you. For this. For us." Cassian's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the tremors running through him. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Clara's pulse hammered. But you're stuck with me anyway. And then, finally, inevitably, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and fierce and full of 2 weeks of restraint breaking all at once. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that made Clara's knees weak, and she kissed him back with equal need, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer even though there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said again. And tomorrow I'm going to court you properly, with flowers and propriety and every rule of society I can possibly follow. But tonight we won, Clara finished. Together, Cassian agreed. And somewhere in the darkness, wolves howled approval. Clara woke to find a note slipped under her door, written in Cassian's precise hand. The staff believe you spent last night in your room as instructed. Let them continue believing it. Meet me in the conservatory at 7. We need to plan our next move. She dressed quickly, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. Cassian was a werewolf. Nox had been defeated publicly. They'd kissed in the garden with the taste of victory on their lips. For one perfect moment, she let herself believe it was over. Then she saw the second note, from Elowen. Miss Whitby, Lord Knox met with Merritt in the village last night. They left together toward London on the early train. Something's wrong. Clara's stomach dropped. Knox didn't accept defeat. He regrouped. She found Cassian in the conservatory, and the moment she showed him Elowen's note, his expression went black. Knox is going for legal channels I can't easily block. Before they could plan further, the Dowager swept in, her face pale and her hands shaking, the first time Clara had ever seen Honoria rattled. Knox filed emergency papers with the Court of Chancery this morning. She handed Cassian a telegram. Petition for immediate confinement on grounds of public danger. He's claiming last night's display was proof of dangerous delusion, that you believe you're a supernatural creature and that belief makes you a threat. He has physicians willing to testify. Clara's breath stopped. He's twisting our victory into evidence of madness. The petition hearing is today, Honoria continued. This afternoon. Knox invoked emergency provisions and called in favors. The speed is highly irregular, but the Lord Chancellor granted it. Her gaze was fierce. For we have hours, not days. Cassian's hands flexed. Then I disappear. Leave England before they can take me. The pack has territories in Scotland. No. Clara's voice cut through his desperation. You run. You prove Knox right. We fight this the way we've fought everything else, with truth and strategy. There's no time for strategy, Cassian said roughly. Clara, if they grant that order, I'll be locked in an asylum and you'll be taken for deprogramming. We both lose everything. Not if we control the narrative first, Clara's mind raced. Can we request the hearing be moved here, to Morcant House? Honoria's eyes sharpened. On what grounds? Medical necessity. The Duke's condition requires specific environmental controls that can't be replicated in London. If the court wants to evaluate him properly, they should do it where he's successfully maintained management for years. Clara turned to Cassian. Bring the judges here. Let them see the protocols, the staff coordination, the systematic approach to a real condition, not delusion. That puts the entire household under scrutiny, the Dowager said slowly. But it also removes Knox's home advantage. She nodded. I'll send word immediately. Magistrate Gray's report from last night will support the request. The response came within 2 hours, faster than Clara expected. But the telegram explained it. Emergency nature of petition allows for flexible venue. Court will convene at Morcant House at 4 o'clock. 2 judges, 3 physicians. All household staff to be available. 4 o'clock. They had 7 hours. Clara spent them preparing with military precision, organizing records, the coaching staff, creating documentation of protocols. But it was Elowen who brought the news that made Clara's blood run cold. Merritt returned an hour ago. He's meeting with staff in the servants' hall, telling them Lord Knox is coming to save them from the Duke's madness. Some are listening. Knox's real strategy. Sabotage from within. Turn the household against itself. Make the protocols seem forced. destroy any evidence of functional management. Clara found Cassian in the East Wing. Merritt is trying to turn the staff against you before the court arrives. If he convinces enough of them that you're dangerous, the judges will have witnesses claiming the management is an illusion. Cassian's voice was steel. Then we remove him, exile him under pack law. And hand Knox a witness who'll tell him everything? Clara shook her head. Merritt genuinely believes he's protecting people. If we can show him the truth, prove you're not your father, he might stop feeding Knox ammunition. You want me to shift for him. I want you to prove you have control your father never achieved. Before the court demands it, Clara stepped closer. If Merritt sees the difference, really sees it, maybe he'll realize Knox is using him to destroy something that actually works. Cassian was quiet for a long moment. Then, tonight, before the hearing, controlled demonstration with you and my mother as witnesses. We show him shift and return, and then give him a choice. They gathered in the conservatory at 2:00. Clara, Cassian, the Dowager, and Merritt, who'd been summoned with authority that didn't permit refusal. You believe I'm losing control, Cassian said, his voice cold. Here I'm going to prove the opposite. Watch me shift voluntarily and return. Full control, then decide if I'm the monster you think I am. Merritt's expression was wary. Your father could shift voluntarily too, in the beginning. My father refused help, refused to build systems, refused to accept what he was. Cassian stripped off his jacket methodically. I've done the opposite. Watch the difference. The transformation came slower this time, controlled, deliberate, like watching a master demonstrate technique. The black wolf stood where the Duke had been, intelligent and aware. Merritt stared, his face pale. Clara pulled the letter she'd found in his room from her pocket. I know Knox pays you. I know you think you're protecting people. But does this look like a man losing control? You're a duke who's mastered something his father never could. The wolf padded closer and sat before Merritt like a trained hound, golden eyes full of recognition. Then it shifted back, smooth, controlled, deliberate. Cassian stood human again, breathing hard but absolutely lucid. I am not my father. I have control. This household doesn't enable madness. It prevents tragedy. Merritt's hands shook. I thought I was trying to save you. You are helping Knox destroy us. The Dowager's voice was cold. Now you choose. Tell the truth when the court arrives, or leave this estate permanently. Merritt looked at the floor for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, what would you have me say? That you've worked here 15 years and witnessed successful management of a hereditary condition. Clara's voice was firm. That the Duke isn't dangerous, and that the protocols work. Merritt swallowed. I'll try, but I don't know if I can undo the damage I've done. Then you'd better try very hard, Cassian said. The court arrives in 2 hours. The judges came at 4:00. Lord Justice Pemberton and Justice Whitmore, stern men carrying the weight of law. With them came 3 physicians, Dr. Ashford, Dr. Gray, and Dr. Monroe. Knox arrived 30 minutes later, perfectly composed and radiating confidence. He'd brought 2 physicians who'd witnessed the equinox test, plus witnesses he claimed feared for their safety. The evaluation was brutal and efficient. Physicians examined Cassian, interviewed staff, reviewed records. Clara answered questions with careful honesty. Yes, episodes existed. Yes, protocols managed them. No, she'd never felt unsafe. When Merritt was called, Knox's expression was smug. He expected his informant to deliver damning testimony. Instead, Merritt said steadily, I've worked here 15 years. His Grace has achieved control his father never possessed. The protocols work. The household is safe. Knox's face went white with fury, but he couldn't contradict his former source without exposing the bribery. By sunset, Lord Justice Pemberton emerged from consultation. We've reviewed evidence and testimony. While the Duke's condition is unusual, we find no proof of immediate danger. However, he paused. Lord Knox's concerns warrant investigation. We're requesting a controlled demonstration, a witnessed episode under medical supervision to determine if management claims are accurate. Cassian's expression didn't change. When? Now, at dusk. Pemberton's gaze was steady. I demonstrate voluntary control, shift and return without violence, and we dismiss the petition. Fail, and we grant the confinement order. I accept, Cassian said. They gathered on the moor as twilight bled across the sky. Judges, physicians, Knox and his people, the Dowager, Clara, and senior pack members, positioned at careful distances. Cassian stood at the center of a marked circle, while Dr. Ashford set up observation equipment. Final test, Pemberton announced. Voluntary transformation and return. No sedation, no restraints. Success means competency established. Failure means confinement. Cassian's gaze found Clara across the circle. Thank you for fighting for me. Don't say goodbye, Clara's voice cracked. Just come back. Always. The transformation was deliberate demonstration. Every movement calculated to prove control. And the physicians made notes. The judges watched with clinical detachment. Knox waited hungrily for the moment Cassian would lose himself. The black wolf stood breathing hard, muscles coiled with power. Dr. Ashford approached with an instrument, and the wolf's lips peeled back in warning. You're treating him like a specimen instead of a patient, Clara called out. How would you react to instruments while vulnerable? Ashford stepped back. Point taken. For 5 minutes, the wolf stood still while physicians observed from safe distances. Its gaze tracked each person, intelligent, aware. When it looked at Knox, the recognition and controlled disdain were unmistakable. Remarkable, Dr. Gray murmured. Cognitive function appears intact. This isn't mindless transformation. Then Knox made his move. He'd insisted one of his concerned citizens be present for legitimacy. A man who now suddenly broke from the group and ran toward the tree line, shouting about attacks and danger. It was bait. Deliberate provocation to trigger hunting instincts. The wolf's entire body tensed, every predatory instinct screaming to chase, to hunt, to prove Knox right. Cassian. Clara's voice cut through chaos. It's a trap. You know it's a trap. The wolf's gaze snapped to her. Clara saw the war raging, instinct versus will, wolf versus man, the pull of the hunt versus the choice to resist. Then the wolf deliberately sat down and turned its back on the running man. The choice was so clear, so controlled, that even the judges made sounds of surprise. Extraordinary, Justice Whitmore breathed. Knox's expression went from triumph to fury. This proves nothing. But the wolf was already shifting back. The return was smooth, like water flowing uphill. Impossible but undeniable. Within moments, Cassian knelt on the moor, human and exhausted and completely lucid. I am not a creature, he said, his voice rough but steady as he met Knox's gaze. I'm a man with a hereditary condition I manage through discipline and protocols. I don't lose control. I don't endanger people. And I won't be confined because you've built a career destroying families you don't understand, Pemberton conferred with Whitmore, then turned to Knox. Your petition is denied. The Duke demonstrated voluntary control and maintained cognition throughout transformation. While unusual, this doesn't constitute dangerous madness requiring confinement. His gaze hardened. Furthermore, your witness's provocation has been noted. Consider yourself fortunate we're not pursuing charges of interference. Knox's face went purple. This is a travesty. That thing is a monster. That thing, the Dowager said coldly, is my son. Leave his lands immediately. Knox stopped at the carriage door and looked back, his gaze locking on Cassian with a hatred that had calcified into something like religion. Your father tore apart 3 of my tenants during one of his episodes, he said, his voice low and terrible. Left them in pieces for their families to find. I watched a mother identify her son by his signet ring. Civilization requires that such things be contained. You are not a man. You are a testament to its failure. For a moment, Clara thought Knox would fight. Then his gaze slid to the judges, as to Merritt who'd turned against him, to the staff watching with clear loyalty. He'd lost, publicly, definitively. This isn't over, he said, but the words rang hollow. Yes, Cassian replied, standing as Clara rushed to wrap a cloak around him. It is. Knox left with his witnesses trailing behind him, and as his carriage disappeared, the gathered pack released breath they'd held for months. They'd won. The celebration in the great hall was subdued, but genuine. But Clara and Cassian escaped to the conservatory, needing quiet after chaos. "We did it," Clara said, still not quite believing it. "You did it." Cassian pulled her close. "You outmaneuvered Knox at every turn. Saved me when I was ready to run." "We saved each other." Clara looked up at him. "But the judges know what you are now. The physicians documented it. This won't stay secret." "I know," his hand cupped her face. "But I'm done hiding. If the world learns the truth, we'll face it together." He paused, suddenly vulnerable. "If you'll stay, I know I'm asking for a lifetime of complicated, of dangerous—" "Stop." Clara pressed her fingers to his lips. "I didn't fight this hard to leave now. I didn't stand with you through everything just to walk away when it got easy." "I love you," Cassian said. "I love you too." Clara smiled. "And yes." He blinked. "I haven't asked yet. You're about to ask if I'll stay. If I'll be part of this household, this pack, this life." Her smile widened. "The answer is yes. To all of it." "Being my partner means more than loving me," Cassian said seriously. "It means being part of the pack, learning our laws. Eventually, if you choose, becoming Luna. At my equal in everything." Clara's breath caught. "You want me to be Luna?" "I want you to choose what you want to be." His voice was fierce. "Companion, partner, Luna, whatever role lets you thrive. I won't trap you in expectations. You fought too hard for freedom." And that understanding, that respect, that refusal to diminish her, made Clara's decision easy. "Then I choose partner," she said. "Equal. Someone who fights beside you. And eventually, Luna, when I've earned it, when I understand what it means." "You already understand it better than most born to it." Cassian's smile was soft. "You saw truth when everyone else accepted lies. You stood with the monster when it would have been safer to run." "I chose you," Clara corrected. Everything else followed. He kissed her then, slow and thorough and full of restraint, finally breaking into something sustainable. Not desperate claiming, but promise, beginning. When they broke apart, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome to Morcant House, Clara Whitby." "Officially, permanently, with no forged references required." Clara laughed. "I suppose I should write to the Whitby solicitors. Tell them their pension challenge is withdrawn." "Already done. My lawyers are efficient. You'll have full access by week's end, with back payment and interest. You're terrifying when you're protective. You love it." "I really do." They stood wrapped in each other and the impossible future they'd fought to build, while outside the pack celebrated and the moors stretched wild and safe under stars that had witnessed centuries of Morcan secrets. Clara had come to this house with nothing but a forged reference and desperate hope. She was staying as partner to a duke, ally to a pack, and the woman who'd outmaneuvered London's most powerful lord using intelligence, courage, and absolute refusal to accept that powerful men always won. The world outside would never fully understand what Morcan House protected. But it didn't need to. As long as Clara and Cassian stood together, human and wolf, partners in everything that mattered, the truth would be safe, and so would they.